Now let's get into interaction number 3, or our first discovery meeting that we're going to have with a customer. Now first what I want to do is review our basic objective of this meeting, and then we're going to get into a specific agenda that you'll have for this meeting. So the primary objective of our first discovery meeting is to understand your prospects' business, their stated needs, and their buying process. As you go into your first discovery meeting, you're going to want to understand your prospect's business. Now, I'm not just saying that your prospect is a restaurant, so therefore you check a box on your worksheet that says they're in the restaurant business or in the food business. What I'm talking about is really understanding all the different aspects of their business. You should really be using this meeting and the very first part of this meeting to get a complete bearing on what your customer does. By the end of your first discovery meeting, you should be able to answer some basic questions about your prospect's business. First, you should be able to eloquently say what your prospect does or what business they're in. Now, I'm not just talking about being able to say, oh, my client's a restaurant, they're in the restaurant business. I'm talking about really understanding what they uniquely do in the market. If they're a restaurant or if they're a kind of business like that, what kind of food do they serve? Or, how have they made a name for themselves? When did they start? How long have they been doing this? You want to be able to answer some really in-depth questions about that business, but you want to be able to answer at a very specific and topical level what business they're in. Second, you're going to want to be able to answer the question of where do they find their customers? How do they currently get business? And third, you should be able to walk somebody through their specific sales funnel. Now, if you're not familiar with a sales funnel, the idea is you have a lot of interactions with potential customers at the top, and you end up having a few customers in the bottom. So you want to be able to eloquently say back to a prospective customer where they get their awareness and how they actually get their customers and what that specific funnel looks like. And finally, number 4, you should be able to eloquently say what the core functions are of their business. This is a little bit more specifically about how the business is set up. What are the different teams or employee groups that are in this type of business? You're going to want to understand the different functions. If they have like a front of the house or a back of the house, or if they have a shipping team and a product team, you're going to want to be able to identify what the core business functions are and what those business units look like. The next part of your first discovery is going to be getting into stated needs. Now, stated needs are the needs that your customer brings to the table. Now, this could be in the form of a requirements document where they've outlined specifically what they're interested in having in their website or what kind of ideas they have currently brainstormed for themselves. This could also come in the form of an RFP or request for proposal. Now, RFPs are usually really thoroughly put together documents when organizations or companies have had a long time to identify what their needs and problems are, but I typically recommend you to take an RFP or stated needs as just one part of the discovery process. It's not the final answer. So even though a business might have spent a lot of time coming up with their RFP, they're not the expert. So unless they have a web consultant on staff that's been working with them for years and understands every facet of their business and understands every facet of the web, they're not the person to come up with this. So RFPs are really good starting places, and they're going to give you a lot of information about what's potentially needed on this project. But what you want to make sure you do with any type of stated needs is kind of address it like doctors address you going in with symptoms. So I'm not sure if you've ever been to a doctor, I'm sure you have, but when you typically go in, you tell them that you have some symptoms. You might have a headache, a stomach ache, or maybe a fever, and you tell them this. You either fill out a form, or when you actually visit the doctor, they come in and they're going to ask you some basic questions. Doctors typically take your symptoms for exactly that, just symptoms. They're an effect of a deeper root cause that might be going on with you. Now, depending on how you answer certain questions, a doctor knows whether or not they need to run more tests or not. Typically what I've outlined here in Discovery is a lot of different tests that you can run. So as we get deeper into Discovery, you're going to realize that I've got a lot of questions and potential things that you should look at in your prospective customer's business. But it's the same thing as visiting a doctor. You're going in there for that initial appointment and you're going through some basic diagnostics. Like I said, you're asking about their business, you're looking to see if they have any stated symptoms that they're bringing to the table, and then it's going to be your job to take those symptoms and then run some tests with them. And that's what Discovery is all about. You're going to take their stated needs, and then you're going to spend some time with them to figure out if there's a true, deeper problem in their business. Now, diagnosing is part of discovery, but it's further on in the process, and it really happens kind of after discovery. So even though you might have some ideas of what might be some solutions to their problems or what might some of their root problems actually be, the discovery is all about asking questions and really getting to know their business. But you're going to want to spend some time with their stated needs and kind of think about that doctor and the symptom analogy. And finally, our third part of our objective is to understand their buying process. I like to use the saying that you sell a lot of websites, but they don't buy a lot of websites. But they might already have a specific buying process. And what I mean by buying process is a lot of times businesses have a specific protocol or a suggested sequence of actions that they're planning on doing in order to acquire the goods or the services that they're looking to acquire. Like when I hire a service professional, I typically have some kind of process that I go through. I might want to talk to 3 or 4 companies, get an idea of what they offer, and get an idea of if I think one of them might be able to solve my pains and my problems. And so what you're trying to do in this part of the process is to understand their buying process. Now, you're going to have a specific process that you're taking them through, but what you want to do is acknowledge their buying process and to see if you need to fit into any specific requirements they have. A lot of times this is really important if you're working on nonprofit or government work and you're proposing a website solution. They're going to have a very specific and stringent buying process. A lot of times companies require you to respond to an RFP by a specific date, and they require you to be in attendance for, let's say, a mass interview. And while I want to respect those processes, you have to also establish on equal footing that they're going to respect your selling process, because you've got a process that's going to uncover some really cool problems and pains that their business and organization might not have already uncovered for themselves, and it's important to let that unfold. And a lot of times what I find is when I kind of work within a customer's buying process, but at the same time make them go through my buying process, that immediately sets me apart from all the competition, because the competition just follows their buying process to a T versus taking them through your sales process and making sure you adhere where you need to. If there's specific deadlines that you need to meet or specific deliverables that you need to give, then you want to do that. But just because a company requests a proposal doesn't necessarily mean that you're not going to be able to do discovery. Just because they submit an RFP to every single person out there doesn't necessarily mean that's the only meeting that you can have with them. Now, I have been in certain situations where somebody's buying process is strict enough that it really starts to kind of handcuff my selling process. And in a lot of instances, I try to avoid those potential projects because I know it's pretty much a lottery going into them, and I don't like that. I like to work with customers that are willing to work within my discovery process, and so that's an important thing to think about.